So I threatened that. Those who are this morning know that I threatened in Utah, there's basically three ways to get a crowd quiet. You can have somebody say a prayer. You can do the Boy Scout motto. Some of us know that. Ernie knows that. Or you can whistle. And my wife taught me that. By the way, when we were giving a shout out earlier to people, I didn't give one to my wife. And she's here today, Sue. Yes. And I mention that because the nature of what I do, I don't get to spend as much time with her. So these are great times when she can come and we can overlap and spend time together. Well, this portion of the program is mine. And I have the next few minutes to share some thoughts with you. And I want you to know I've given a lot of thought to what I would share with you. And I had a really nice speech. As a matter of fact, there's a reporter in Washington, I think we're streaming this, and he's watching this, and he's going to say this is not the speech he gave me that he's going to give. But I would rather, I think, just use my 10 minutes to kind of talk from my heart. And I think it's easy to forget how many of you have not actually heard about the journey, the experience. Many of you have come in at portions of it. Some of you have been here for the whole thing. So I wanted to kind of share a little bit more from my perspective, how it is that we're all here today in Utah at a climate summit, right? Like, how does that happen? How do we have, by the way, there were 600 or so RSVPs for this event. How does that happen in a place like Utah? And I want to start with one of my favorite people to talk about. Many of you have heard me talk about my father. My father passed away about 8 years ago, and he didn't know it, but he was an environmentalist. He would have never used that word to describe himself. He claimed to be 5'5". I think at best he was 5'4", maybe even a little shorter than that. He was the type of individual, if you knew him, you would agree with this, that if he were in this room today, hundreds of you would go home thinking that he was your best friend, and that he had spent all his time with you. He just loved people, and he loved to be social. And he took all the extrovert, by the way, out of me, and he had all the extrovert in him. But when I was young, my father used to frequently do things like point to a mountain and say, "Look at how beautiful that mountain is." Or he would point to a sunset and say, "Look how beautiful that sunset is." And as a young man, like probably most young men, I kind of rolled my eyes and say, "Oh yeah, that's great, Dad." And interestingly, years later, my wife and I moved away from Utah. We came back, and I remember very clearly, I used to drive home from work, and I would stop my car, and I would look at, we lived down in Utah County, I'd look at Mount Timpanogos with the blue sky and the white snow on it and clouds blowing off of it, and I would literally take a picture of it. It was so beautiful. And I was always disappointed when I would look at the camera that it didn't capture, right, the beauty of the moment. But that's kind of life cycle, isn't it? Well, my dad, he used to take us on these adventures. He obviously was in an era without internet. So he would hear about outdoor adventures. He'd take a few notes on a piece of paper like this. He'd load us in the car, and then we would haul off looking for this adventure. And it's stunning none of us died. There was a hike that we took from Big Cottonwood Canyon over to Mill Creek Canyon. And my dad said, "Look, you don't need any water or food. It's a couple of hours." And we left in tennis shoes, and we were very young kids. And we hiked, and we hiked, and we hiked, and we hiked. At about 10 o'clock at night, we finally dropped down into Mill Creek Canyon we had no food or no water all day. And that's kind of how his adventures went. My wife, when we were dating, he decided that he wanted to go from Brighton over to Heber and on cross-country skis. And so he rented all the equipment, and he spent all day finding these avalanche things where if we were an avalanche, that we could be found. Well, as a result, we started off late in the afternoon from Brighton, and the sun was at its full strength, so we got all wet from the snow. And then by the time we got to the top, it was getting dark, and we came down off the top from Brighton down into Heber, and we did what every group is told not to do. We all split up and went different directions. And by the time we came down, it was all freezing. Nobody died. But this was my youth. And I remember my father just instilling in me this sense of the grandeur of this earth and how lucky we were to be in Utah, where this was so profound in everything that we did. And I realized a couple of things. One aspect was just simply the beauty and how important the beauty was. Another, though, was how I felt when I was in the outdoors. I felt at peace, I felt at calm, I felt in harmony, and it was what I would call therapeutic, right, to be in our outdoors. And I remember being around campfires, and I remember mentors teaching me life's lessons. And interestingly, how much more as a young man you absorb and take that information in when you're at a campfire outside. And so I share all that with you to kind of put in context what happened to me when I went to Washington, D.C. I'd not really been confronted, this was 8 years ago, with this whole climate debate. And so I found myself in Washington, D.C., kind of with this growing up as an environmentalist that didn't call themselves an environmentalist. And I was confronted with this world that wanted to put me and everybody else into a box. And the box was, you're either really good at climate or you're really bad. There's no in between. You're one or the other. And by the way, there's a test. And here's the test. Is the climate changing, and did man influence it? And if you answered the question with any degree of hesitation, you were in this box. And if you were unequivocal and felt like we had to take radical steps, you were in this box. And there was nothing in between. Well, guess what? As a stereotype, Republicans wouldn't take the test. They didn't like the test. They felt like it was setting them up. Here's my perfect analogy. How many of you have been to a timeshare presentation? Okay. By the way, I have a bill for timeshares. They're not going to like it. But in a timeshare presentation, you're across the table from a salesperson who has paid a lot of money to get you to do something you probably wouldn't do otherwise and don't want to do. So they use a lot of pressure. And they say things to you like, Mr. Curtis, do you love your kids? And you think for a minute and you say, if I say yes, then I'm in a trap, right? Because then why wouldn't I buy the timeshare if I love my kids? So they say, Mr. Curtis, do you love your kids? And I would say, no, right? Because I didn't want to give them that. And I think that's how Republicans responded a lot of time to this question, right? Because no. Why? Because if you say yes, then why won't you do this and this and this and this and this, right? That seemed very irrational to Republicans and, to be honest, more feel-good than actual results. And so as a stereotypical Republican, that's where I lined up. And I would go to town hall meetings, and inevitably I represented at the time in Congress the youngest district in Congress, and some young person would stand up in front and say, where are you at on climate change? Will you admit that the climate's changing and man's had some influence on it? And guess what? I hear in my head, timeshare, right? Timeshare. No, right? Because there's a trap. It really has nothing to do with the science. I'm not a scientist. There's really nothing to do at all with the science. It's how I feel. And one of the great analogies that I use, and you'll excuse me because before this is over, I'm going to offend all of you, but back in the original Trump one, we would talk about the border wall, and the word wall picked up all sorts of meaning. Is that fair? So it wasn't really a wall. It was separating children. It was policies that were cruel, right? And so when Democrats heard the word wall, right, they want to become defensive. They put their arms up to fight, and they wanted to fight. It really had nothing to do with the wall. Most of them had supported a wall before. It was what was in the word. And this is what happens to climate. It's not the word. It's everything that goes along with the word that's associated with the word. So I've had a lot of fun. I've had hundreds and hundreds of people over to my home in groups of about 50 at a time to talk climate. And one of my favorite things to do is to say, and these are hardcore Republicans, most of them. Some of you in the room have been through this drill. One of my favorite things to do was to say, look, I'm going to challenge you to do something. I want you to go home tonight. I want you to go into the bathroom. I want you to close the door, turn on the fan so nobody can hear you, look in the mirror, and say the word climate. And guess what? They would laugh just like you because that was really uncomfortable. Just the word itself was really uncomfortable. So I started thinking about this, and I started changing the narrative. And it was clear to me that as conservatives, we needed to somehow recalibrate, because this is the key thing. Is there anybody in Utah, in the world, who doesn't want to leave the earth better than they found it? Isn't that a far better question, right? Does that elicit tension, right? No, it doesn't, right? So I started asking people that question. And I said, you know what, we need to start forming together as Republicans, conservatives, to start talking about this. We're going to lose our mic? Okay, we're good. I had a problem. Not so much in Utah, but in Washington, D.C., if you didn't use the word climate, you had no credibility. So there were groups and there were caucuses that called themselves, for instance, the Teddy Roosevelt Caucus. And they were conservatives who wanted to show that they were good with the environment. Guess what? Nobody cared. Because they didn't take climate head on. So I came back to my staff and I said, we got to start using the climate. And the Utah one said, please don't. Please don't, right? Because it elicits, right, all of that stuff, right? And the D.C. ones were more receptive to it because they understood the climate in D.C. And I just knew if we didn't use the word climate, we wouldn't be taken seriously. So we decided we were going to, there were a couple steps in there that I'll skip just because of time. But I said, let's form a group in Washington. We're going to call it the Conservative Climate Caucus. Why that name? Because I want to show conservative that we have a different lens on. We're going to come up with different answers than you typically have seen because we're conservative. But we're not afraid to talk climate. We're not afraid to have this discussion. We too want to leave the earth better than we found it. My team said, oh, that's great, John. You'll get 4 or 5 Republicans that will join that. When I left the House of Representatives last year, 85 House Republicans had joined a caucus that said the Conservative Climate Caucus. Because, thank you, they were tired of the narrative that they didn't care. They were tired of not being able to engage on the conversation. They were tired of seeing other people make energy decisions and Republicans not be at the table. And they wanted to be at the table. And this is what happened. For decades, conservatives abandoned the conversation. We just ran from it because we hated the word climate. So if the word climate came up, guess what we did? We went someplace else. And then we said, oh, that's just huge. That's just a bunch of crap, right? That's what we said. And we didn't really have a thoughtful discussion about where we were on climate. During the Biden years, okay, I have one more. Is that better? Maybe if I turn it on? Okay. During the Biden years, let's be honest, what was the U.S. energy policy? We had none. But we had a climate policy. So if you weren't talking climate, you were not at the energy table. And Republicans were not at the energy table. So decisions were made that really bugged them. EVs, right? And you could go down the list of things that really bothered them. We needed to be at the table from our perspective saying, we care too about the earth, but these are the decisions that we would make. And that's how this started to form and come together. And today, interestingly, the world has changed in 8 years. 8 years ago, we didn't feel like it was going to be a problem to meet our energy needs. We heard from the Secretary of Energy today that we need 100 gigawatt per year now. So to put that in perspective, if you don't know what a gigawatt is, think of the largest nuclear facility that you know of. That's 1. So you need 100 of those per year. And now all of a sudden the conversation is very different. Well, interestingly, guess what? In D.C., Democrats are now using the term all of the above. And Republicans aren't. Like, I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened to all of the above, but all of a sudden we're not all of the above. Listen, here's the reality. We need every electron we can get. And this is something that is very, very powerful. The market is driving three things: affordable energy, reliable energy, and clean energy. And if you think government can outregulate that, I believe you're wrong. Right? Clean is way ahead of government regulation. It just is, right? Consumers are demanding clean. So historically, Republicans have leaned really into affordable and reliable and not clean. Is that fair? Right? Well, the market's solving that for us, and we need to care about clean because the market is driving clean. It wants. But guess what? Europe leaned into clean and abandoned affordable and reliable. And guess what? They woke up and they were buying dirty fossil fuels from an enemy, and their fuels that they had for themselves were unaffordable and unreliable. They too missed the threesome, right? So what this is about is, how does Utah excel in affordable, reliable, clean? And I've learned along the way that you don't rule out any energy sector. So for instance, if you say renewables are not reliable, why would you say that? Because before energy storage, you had real problems with renewables. Fair enough? I was in Kenya. Meg Whitman was the ambassador, and she was trying to lobby people to move their businesses to Kenya because they were 95% renewable. 5 minutes into her speech, the lights went out. Right? Now, if you're a business, you can't have that. More and more renewables are solving that with storage, right? I mean, that's changing because they've dealt with that. Nuclear has an Achilles heel: cost. It's too expensive. Affordable, reliable, clean, it's missing on cost. It will solve that, I'm absolutely convinced. Our fossil fuels here in the state have an Achilles heel: emissions. Guess what? I'm going to convene us all back here in the year 2050, and I'm going to make you a bet. Anybody want to take me up on it? We will be burning fossil fuels at zero net emissions. I really believe that. Why? Because the market's driving it. Carbon sequestration, direct air capture, and a lot of technologies are, and the amount of reduction in emissions from fossil fuels is amazing. Here's a really interesting fact. The natural gas we produce in the basin and here in the United States has 40% less emissions than Russian natural gas. Imagine if we replaced Russian natural gas with U.S. natural gas around the world. It would fuel our economy. It would make other countries dependent on energy. And guess what? More greenhouse gas emissions than the entire Green New Deal. Fossil fuels. There is a role for fossil fuels in our energy future, and we have to be careful not to demonize them, because part of what's happened over time is a demonization of not just fossil fuels, but of the people that produce them. And we forget that we made it through World War II, we made it through the Depression, and we made it through the Industrial Revolution on the backs of the people producing our fossil fuels. And sometimes we're too quick to demonize them, and I actually think they're part of the solution. Well, okay, that's how we ended up here today. Where do we go from here? We've got a great panel that talks about the future. That's where we're going next. That's what I'm leading into. Oh, okay, sorry, not so fast. Lori reminded me we have one thing before that. So before I introduce Sarah, let me just say that this is very, very exciting to me to see this room full of Utahns here. And this is, so if you're me, this is what I'm seeing. I'm seeing some of my friends that are all in climate here. I'm seeing some of my friends who are looking at me with their arms folded, a little suspicious of the Republican that talks about climate, right? And we're all here together. And we're having this dialogue, and this is really cool. This is how we solve problems. This is how we find common ground. This is how we move this country forward and this state as the leader in clean, affordable, reliable energy is by having meetings like this today. So thank you. So our next speaker that I'm going to introduce now is, thank you. Thank you. That was a whole lot better than my written speech, I hope. Okay, so I'm going to introduce to you now Sarah Jewett. Sarah, come on up while I'm introducing you. Here she comes. So if you don't know, there's something really exciting happening in Utah with geothermal. And Sarah, first of all, she is a Harvard Business School graduate and the vice president of strategy at Fervo. She's going to tell us a little bit about Fervo, and she's going to teach us a little bit about geothermal, which is really cool and really exciting.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much, Senator. We're going to get rid of that one because it doesn't work. Okay, excellent. Well, this is a bit unfair because I'm getting you after lunch and after the senator, and it's Friday afternoon, and I'm going to try to be funny, and it might not hit, and it's just going to be disaster. But I think I should also speak from the heart here, since I'm a little bit nervous, and I'm going to talk about geothermal, which hasn't been mentioned that much, though the secretary did mention it a bunch. Senator, I'm going to start by speaking from the heart to you. I love you, Senator. I love you. Why do I love this? Oh, apparently this happens all the time. Why do I love you? Let me count the ways. I love you because you are a level-headed leader who I've come to know, my business has come to know, and you have humanized what a politician is for me. And that has been a really, truly incredible experience. In addition to that, I think the way that you have welcomed in collaboration across the aisle has also been very humanizing for me as a U.S. citizen. So I really appreciate that. And then you've been an incredibly dedicated advocate for geothermal energy, which geothermal energy, I was joking with the Utah Clean Energy guys that earlier in the program, if I was trying to get hydrated by taking shots of water every time somebody said geothermal, I wouldn't be very hydrated because nobody was really saying it, even though Utah is an incredible place for geothermal. But Senator Curtis is an early adopter, and you have been an incredibly dedicated advocate, both in sponsorship of the GEO Act and in your defense of geothermal tax credits in OB3, and just generally your posturing that it is part of the all of the above energy solution. So thank you so much. Yes. Thank you. I also love the Conservative Climate Caucus. I really do love that we have managed to pull together people with so many different thoughts and backgrounds and approaches, and we've managed to come together and all agree that we do want to make this world better. I also really, really love the market-driven innovation approach, and I'm going to talk a lot about market-driven and innovation in this talk because we are a solution that is meeting the market through innovation right now. And then I also love Utah. I just want to give a quick shout out to the U. We were here a few weeks ago to recruit students. I love the University of Utah. They're also geothermal energy pioneers developing down in Beaver County through the Department of Energy sponsored Utah Forge, which is the frontier observatory for geothermal. If you all haven't gone, you should go check it out, though you might be distracted by a very cool geothermal power plant next door, which happens to be ours. So I love the University of Utah. I'm going to talk a little bit more about why Utah is such an incredible leader for geothermal energy as well. But who am I? Here I am rattling on. I'm the Vice President of Strategy at Fervo Energy. Fervo Energy is a geothermal energy power developer based out of Houston, Texas. We do have an office here in Salt Lake, and we have an office down in Milford, Utah, in Beaver County. Who here has been to Beaver County, Utah? Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. Okay, we love Beaver County at Fervo Energy. I spend like kind of part of my time in Houston, Texas, and part of my time in Beaver County, Utah. And so I have come to really, really love, in addition to Senator John Curtis, I love Beaver County, Utah. And I want to wear a shirt that says, I love Beaver all the time. Oh, lol. What are we building at Fervo Energy? We are building a 0.5 gigawatt geothermal power plant right now, which is our very first greenfield geothermal energy project that we will construct. Very first, indicating that there will be very, very, very many more to come after the very first. And what I hope that you will be left with today after this quick conversation that I hope to make quick is that geothermal energy is an incredible solution that is not in the future, but it is here today and is a baseload, reliable solution that is rapidly becoming more affordable. Utah is the hub for geothermal power. Geothermal power is about to proliferate in a really, really meaningful way, and Utah is the place where that proliferation will begin. Fervo's building a 0.5 gigawatt project today. I'm about to show you some drone footage of our site. But just want to say really quickly how geothermal energy works, because I have been given the feedback before that I launched too much into the spiel without talking about how it works. And I'm going to be very basic. We extract heat from the earth, we pull it out of the earth, and then we use that heat to spin a turbine and generate electricity, as pretty much all electricity is generated. What we are doing at Fervo Energy is we are just pulling the heat out of the earth in a little bit of a different way. Typically, traditionally, like at the Blundell Geothermal Power Facility in Beaver County, Utah, there is an existing hydrothermal resource. What is that? It's a highly natural fractured set of rocks that are very hot, that typically have steam entrained in the rocks, and you can either stick a straw into the ground and pull that steam out and run it through a turbine, generate electricity, or you can drill a pair of vertical wells. You can push mass into the resource, push water into the resource, pull water out of the resource or steam, run that through a turbine and generate electricity. That is somewhat geographically specific. We have to go find these hydrothermal resources. There are a lot of hydrothermal resources all across the American West, but they are geographically specific. What is not geographically specific necessarily is heat in rocks. That exists everywhere. We also, over the last two decades from the oil and gas industry, have managed to develop very scientifically proven an accessible set of technology to extract something else from underneath the surface of the earth, which is oil and gas, which is very present in the Uinta Basin in Utah. And we are basically lifting all of that technology from the oil and gas industry and deploying it in this new application to extract heat that we then pull to the surface. We strip all that heat out through a heat exchanger to a different working fluid. Isopentane is what we're using. We run that through the power generation cycle. We re-inject 100% of our water into the subsurface to go pick up heat again. So that's how it works. Okay, video team, go ahead and play my cool drone footage, which I say is my baby, so you have to say it. It's very cute. You can tell me later. Yeah, thank you, thank you. Okay, why is geothermal such an amazing solution? Geothermal energy is reliable. It is a 24/7 carbon-free energy solution. It runs all the time. It does not rely on the weather. That is what makes it an incredible complement to all other energy resources. It is a clean baseload energy resource, so it complements fossil fuels. It also complements intermittent renewables. That's why Utah is such a great place for this to start, because Utah is an all-of-the-above energy state, and geothermal fits very strongly in the all-of-the-above application. Right now, as you've heard a little bit today, and specifically from Secretary Wright, there is infinite demand for reliable, clean energy, and we are finding a very robust market for the power that we're selling into the market today for this reliable power, and we are able to deploy this project under basically just like market conditions at market rates, and we are fully contracted for all 500 megawatts of this project today at a market clearing price that is not necessarily supported by the government. We do have tax credits that will be very helpful on this first phase while we're still high cost. But at this point in time, you know, there is demand for power well in excess of $100 a megawatt hour, because everybody needs firm energy at this point in time. And so we are just selling this power from this project into the market at that rate and providing a reasonable return that is attracting private investment. We are deploying proven technology in a new application, and I think that is really, really key, because we're not having to see whether or not this is going to work. We're using oil and gas techniques of horizontal drilling, fiber optic sensing, hydraulic fracturing. I started my career actually on the eastern side of the state, fracking in the Uinta Basin. I was a field engineer for Schlumberger and have a lot of fracking expertise. So we are doing very similar approach to hydraulic fracturing in these wells to extract heat from them. And then Fervo has maintained a really, really, really maniacal focus on cost reduction. And I think that's what sets us apart from a lot of different clean energy solutions, is that we are incredibly focused on making this an affordable clean energy resource, not because it is not clearing the market today at market rates, but because we want to be able to have the flexibility to have the market shift on what their willingness to pay is for this resource in the future and still make a meaningful return on projects. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of how we're reducing the cost, we just finished our 26th well that we have drilled, 26th horizontal well. Our first horizontal well that we ever drilled took us 72 days to drill. Our most recent one that we just drilled took us 14 days. The majority of the costs on these wells, we do have a lot of tangible costs associated with the actual steel and cement that go into these wells, but a huge amount of the cost of these wells is intangible. It's just day rate on the drilling rig and labor, et cetera. So we are meaningfully able to reduce the cost of geothermal energy, and we're well within a very productive trajectory of reducing this over time. Okay, so I think I've talked for just about too long. I'm gonna give one quick nod to Utah. Utah has been an incredible, incredible place for us to operate, and I think that everyone should take it as a highly productive example for how energy can be built. We've talked a lot about permitting reform today, and I just want to use permitting reform as an example. The Utah Bureau of Land Management, I could kiss and marry. They're just amazing. I mean, like, I've now professed my love to Senator John Curtis. I'm going to marry the Utah Bureau of Land Management. I clearly want to live here. I should no longer live in Texas. Utah Bureau of Land Management has been a highly, highly, highly collaborative institution for us. We have managed to, I'm going to give you a sort of a staggering stat. We've approved 2 environmental assessments under NEPA. One of them took 60 days to process. The other took 79. When we tell people that, they say like, oh, how'd you get around all of the NEPA? And we're like, no, 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 we did not get around the NEPA. We did the NEPA. We did it in an extremely collaborative and coordinated fashion with the Utah Bureau of Land Management, where we started a year and a half in advance. We said, this is what we want to do. They said, okay, educate us. We educated them. They said, this is what we need to see. We took notes. We went and built what they needed to see. We ran that product by them. We said, is this what you were looking for? They said, yes to this, no to this. We would wish to see more here, over here. You could do better here. We took notes. We went back and we did that. And by the time we actually submitted our environmental assessment, we had built such goodwill in the Bureau of Land Management. They so deeply understood our projects. We had done such deep environmental assessment, historic preservation assessment in the area, endangered species assessment. We were so tight with the community and had told them exactly what we were doing and exactly what we were going to look to permit, that we solicited input from them, where we said, we want you to comment on our EA. And they did, and they were all highly supportive, and the Bureau of Land Management was able to put it through very effectively. So I think it's a very, very good example of what strong collaboration can look like in the permitting world. And so yes, we have a lot of things that we could do to increase, permitting certainty across the American West, but we also have a very good example of how to do it right. And it really takes a lot of effort on the state side and on the company side. Utah is an incredible place to operate. I love being here. The ease of operation is amazing. The existing supply chain and existing workforce are highly productive for geothermal. And we have just been so appreciative of every single person that we have encountered here. We're very now close in with the local community and the local workforce, and it's just been a dream. So thanks to Utah, thanks to CCC for having us, and thank you, Senator Curtis and your staff.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm speechless. Thank you. All right, I'm going to invite also, in addition to Sarah, I'm going to invite Heather Reams. Heather, we introduced to you earlier. She is the president and CEO of CRESS. That stands for Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions. Jason Branch. Jason is the senior vice president of power supply at Pacificor. And Ricky Renko Browning, president of Utah Petroleum. And this will be our final part of our program. We'll have a panel, and then we'll wind up here shortly. So thank you, panelists, for joining us. Have a seat. And does that work? Good. Okay. Good. Well, it's been a good day. And thank you for taking us home in this final part. This panel is entitled The Future of Conservative Climate Policy. And Heather, I want to start with you. So just for a little background, I told you a little bit about my history, when I first got to Congress, I said, are there any Republicans talking about this? One of my staff members said, well, there's this Heather Reams, and she has a lunch today. Why don't you go listen to her? And that was the first, like, oh, wow, there's another conservative talking about this. So, Heather, thank you. I'm curious. I want to kind of start with you and ask you, you've been at this a long time. What's different? What have you seen change? What are the shifts? Like,
well, first there's the Conservative Climate Summit led by Senator John Curtis, so I think that's pretty exciting. Starting this work over a decade ago, it was a pretty lonely place. There weren't a lot of Republicans talking about climate. I did call it the C word. I think going into a mirror and saying climate, I think a lot of people I knew were afraid. I was told I wasn't a conservative because I believe that the climate is changing and that we should do something about it. So it was a very different kind of place. I think things changed probably after, I want to say when the Green New Deal came out with the representative from New York. And I think that really gave Republicans a chance to say, we're not that. Like, we're something else. And we want to solve the problem differently. Getting to, the climate changing is a really big challenge globally. And one side of the aisle shouldn't be solving the problem. Like hard issues, we should be solving the problem, working together in Congress and legislatures, solving big problems. That wasn't really happening with climate. So I think there's more of a willingness to have the conversations. We certainly weren't having convenings like we're having now. There's a Conservative Climate Caucus from your leadership. There's a Conservative Climate Foundation that supports that caucus. There are a number of right of center organizations that you see in the back here that are supporting elected officials and policymakers and giving representation. And it's not just in the West, it's all across the country. You have college campuses engaging as well. So I think you're starting to see more and more. It's momentum. We just have to keep it going.
thank you. Does anybody else want to answer that before I deviate? Okay, Ricky, so we talk about change. You've seen your industry, I'll use the word demonized, right? And now we have people like the secretary saying we're going to need everything that you can produce. But I'd be curious from your industry's perspective how they view this issue. And by the way, I'll tell you all something kind of interesting. When I was on this journey and people would ask me if the climate's changing and man's influencing it, I would ask that question of a lot of people. And all the industry executives that would come into my office, I'd sit them down and I'd say, well, is the climate changing and is man influencing it? And I had somebody, if you're familiar with Heritage Action, it's a very conservative think tank, come into my office and I asked them that question. And they said, well, of course, right? And so it was interesting that in a lot in your industry, just kind of like me, just put that question aside and say, what can we do to be good producers, to be good stewards? So talk to us a little bit about how your industry balances the need for production and responsible production.
Sure, happy to. Thank you for the opportunity, and thanks to all of you for coming and being part of this conversation. I think our industry has been demonized, certainly, and our industry is maybe not the best at communicating what we do and how we do it and why we do it. But the reality is that the oil and gas industry or the geothermal industry or industries in general don't create a market. We respond to a market. So if there isn't a driver out there for the products and the things that we are doing, we're not going to be doing them. It's been interesting to watch the policy shift and to watch my industry engage with that. I think that Chris Wright said all of the things that I wanted to say today. It's a hard act to follow, but the focus on free markets has been really refreshing to see that change. And I think from a conservative perspective, to ensure that we are still allowing consumer choice is really, really critical. And to see some of the turning points, I think, in the last few years has come from that restriction in consumer choice. We saw it around tailpipe emission standards that were trying to pull back people's vehicle choices. We saw that in potential bans of gas stoves. And I think that really helped change the conversation and shift the narrative to say, wait a minute, what are we doing here? Is there a more flexible approach that we can take to meet the goals that we want to see. One example of a success story of that is right here in Utah along the Wasatch Front. We have an air quality problem. We have an ozone attainment problem. And instead of having a very draconian response to that from a regulatory perspective, the industry and the regulators worked together and flexibly came up with a solution to produce what are now called Tier 3 fuels. So you can get Tier 3 fuels, which have significantly lower sulfur emissions, pretty much anywhere along the Wasatch Front. All 5 of our refineries are producing those. It's a voluntary effort, and it reduces about 85% of emissions out of vehicles, and vehicle tailpipes is the largest source of emissions. So as we talk about climate, as we talk about emissions, I think from our point of view, we're really encouraged by some of the shifts that we're seeing of making sure that we are maintaining consumer choice, that we are following technologies that are innovative and market-driven, and our industry is simply responding to the market signals that are being sent.
Would you say it's fair to say your industry feels pressure to be clean?
Of course we do, but that pressure's internal as well. We live here, we're
That's
members of the
right.
community.
Right. But it's just, I guess what I'm saying is it's not something that you ignore, right? It's a big deal in your world, right?
We take it very seriously, and you see that by the drive in innovation.
Yeah. Jason, PacifiCorp deals every day with this balance between affordable, reliable, clean. You've done a really good job at affordable and reliable. You're doing a lot with clean. Talk to us about that balance and how you guys make decisions and how the market drives you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Senator Curtis. I don't believe I'll be able to convey and express my love to you like Sarah did, but I do bring.
You can
I
try.
do bring greetings from from the Huntington plant. Senator Curtis actually met us in Price, Utah, last year, and he said it was the first of a kind for him. It was a turban retirement party. Do you recall that, Senator Curtis?
Absolutely, yeah.
So
How many of you have been to a turban retirement party? Okay.
So we've got. Well, I guess I was there as well.
Okay.
So it's a pretty select group that's made it to one of those parties. You know, really, I think about this question a little bit, and a coworker of mine described fast food, or I should say food, using really 3 criteria. He says you can have it fast, you can have it so that it tastes good, or you can have it cheap or affordable. And he says you can usually get 2 out of those 3. It might be fast and affordable, but it's probably not going to be great. It might be good and affordable, but it's likely not going to be fast. At any rate, as you think about that kind of 3-pronged approach or 3 stools to a chair, that really lands as well within the PacifiCorp construct or Rocky Mountain Power construct. It's been mentioned several times here today. We've got affordable, we've got reliable, which, by the way, reliable is a really non-negotiable point in our industry, and it's even a point of national interest, and we've seen that in Michigan and Maine, where the Department of Energy has kept open a couple of fossil fuel generating stations. And then you have an environmental stewardship, or a clean, as you just described it. It's difficult for one individual resource to check all 3 of those boxes. And that's something that the utility wrestles with all of the time. Sarah was showing, obviously, a lot related to geothermal. I could see the Blundell geothermal plant, owned and operated by PacifiCorp in the background there. That's just one of about 75 different locations of power generating facilities. Senator Curtis, I believe you mentioned 100 megawatts were required per year of energy as we go forward. PacifiCorp operates 12. So if you think about that over the history of Rocky Mountain Power, Pacific Power, we have 12 megawatts, or gigawatts, I'm sorry, 12 gigawatts of energy. And to think about the scale of bringing 100 gigawatts on annually is pretty substantial. So balancing those things within that reliable construct becomes a challenge. And I truly do believe PacifiCorp looks at it. We're apolitical. We are not a resource development company. We're looking for others to bring creative solutions. And so it truly is a market-based program. The Department of Interior, it was mentioned in one of the earlier presentations I was listening to, Secretary Doug Burgum now requires a handful of additional permit steps for renewable resources. What we've seen there is we've seen a pretty big constraint on investment now that we're seeing in the solar and wind space. It's projected that the wind turbine generators, the orders on those are down about 50%, as well as solar panels, et cetera. So you are seeing the impacts of an administration that does have something that's outside of an all-of-the-above energy policy. So PacifiCorp obviously, looks at all of these resources. We do play a major role in the climate activity just because of the combustion of thermal fuels. But the resources really interplay well together. If I think about, and I'm quite proud of what we've done as a utility, we've used our thermal resources like coal generation or gas generation. We've changed our speeds in which we can ramp those resources up and down and still maintain flame stability. What that does is it allows us to integrate more and more renewables, which are obviously free energy resources, into the system. And we've also been able to set a lower minimum threshold on what they have to operate at. It's almost like keeping your car running so they stay online, and that allows an even greater integration of renewable resources. Now, those thermal resources are a large part of our utility and still very necessary as we continue to scale up batteries, and they compete in the marketplace. So they've acted as the quasi-battery in most functions. Them being available, them being able to ramp, them acting as contingency reserve obligations. The thermal resources have been a major part of the portfolio. I'll leave it with this one spot on climate. Rocky Mountain Power, unlike most businesses, actually has programs that have demand-side management where we literally target our own load demand, our own revenue, our own sales, and we try to put programs in place to reduce. And those programs like WattSmart and others are an important part to help us avoid.
Okay, that means you're done.
Hello.
Okay.
Constructing expensive assets. And so if you think about PacifiCorp, it truly is a responsible player in this demand-side management space as well as integrating renewables into the system with an underlying construct of reliability is a non-negotiable activity.
Yeah. So I'll just end on that reliability. I used to talk about this, and one of my team members once said to me, people don't understand when you say reliability. The reason why is we take it so for granted here in the United States. How many times have you in your life have you gone to the light switch and it didn't turn on in your businesses and things like that? And it's really very impressive and not something that you have around the world. Okay, Sarah, and then Ricky next with a very similar question. You've seen the impact of what you're doing in Beaver, in the county there. And Ricky, you're seeing the impact both in rural. Can you both talk, Sarah, you go first, about the impact of your work in rural Utah and how it changes dramatically their tax base and their lives?
So when I rolled into Beaver County for the first time, it was 2021. We broke ground in June of 2023. So it was about 2.5 years before we broke ground. And I rolled into town. I said, you all are familiar with Utah Forge because they've been here for a while. I come from a very small company. We were 6 employees at the time, Fervo Energy, and we're going to build a project here. And I think the mayor laughed. He was like, oh, okay, cute. This cute little girl from Texas, I was wearing my boots, like she's telling us that she's going to come build a big project here. And in 2021, Smithfield Foods, which is one of the largest pork producers in the U.S., who has a very large presence in Beaver County, Utah, and is the largest non-ag employer when I roll into town in 2021, had announced that they were closing a large portion of their facilities in the county. And the county had declared a state of emergency because they were planning on they were looking ahead thinking that they were going to lose a majority of these non-ag jobs. This is a county of 9,000 people. And so my visit to Beaver County was well-timed. And though the mayor doubted me then, we have a very close relationship now. And he says, you came in, you asked us right off the bat, what do you need? Like I had said to him, what do you need in order for good partnership to come about? And he said he'd never been asked that question before. And today we're very, very close partners, which we have to be, because if the county and the city of Milford were not on board with this project, our project would not exist. We have 350 people working on our site today. Let's say very few of them carpool. So we have 300 trucks rolling through town every morning. We have large truckloads. We have our rail facility in town. They are incredibly important in every single thing that we do. And we have tried to be the best partners that we possibly can by employing as many people from the local community as we can. We have now hired about 15 locals to work at Fervo Energy. They're W-2 employees at Fervo. We now have 200 people on staff. But our subcontractors have started hiring people. We try to prioritize local businesses working on the site whenever we can. And we also have built an apprenticeship program at the Southern Utah University for people to go and actually learn about geothermal power and then come and be hired on our site. So we are trying our very best to come at workforce development from many different angles, because the community is part of the project. And if we're going to build a truly sustainable project, it requires a sustainable impact on the surrounding community, and that's really what we believe. And the impact has been meaningful. And it really has made it a wonderful, wonderful part of the project that the community is so supportive and so involved.
Yeah, I would say in the Uinta Basin, we are blessed with a supportive environment. The oil and gas industry is really the lifeblood of the basin and truly the backbone of the state's economy more broadly. And for those of you that haven't been out to the Uinta Basin, to Duchesne and Uinta County, I would encourage you to do so. It is quite a different place than it used to be. If we just look back to before COVID, Utah was the 13th largest oil producer in the United States. Today, just a few short years later, we are the 9th largest oil producer in the United States. We have more than doubled the state's oil production in just a few short years, and that's an amazing story. And to go back to the question of clean, because that's critically important and underpins everything that we do, at the same time that we've doubled that production, we have actually decoupled growth and emissions. So if I had a chart to show you today, you would see production going up, up, up. You would see emissions, and not just relative intensity in terms of emissions per barrel produced, but overall emissions continuing to go down. And that's something that we are incredibly proud of, that we've been able to decouple that growth in production and emissions, and something that we're committed to doing going forward. But along with that, if we look at what that means for the local community, for the local economy, just taking a 5-year look back, in direct fees and taxes, so we're not talking about, induced economic benefits, GDP, but direct dollars paid to those municipalities and to the state. Over the last 5 years, the oil and gas industry has contributed more than $6 billion. That goes into public education, that goes into roads, that goes into emergency services, critically important. And we've also seen, because of all of that growth in the basin, we've seen a lot of merger and acquisition activity. In the last year and a half, we again have seen, and I don't get to talk in billions very often, so excuse me if I'm excited to do it twice, but we've seen $6 billion in investment into the basin in the last year and a half. Those companies that have come in, one of the very first things they say is, of course, you have amazing rock. Uinta Basin is one of only 2 growth basins in the United States right now. We're seeing declines in every major oil and gas basin in the country except for the Uinta Basin and the Utica. The second thing they say is you have an amazing workforce. You have skilled, hardworking individuals. We employ more than 100,000 employees, members of our community. And although there's this misconception out there that it's, big oil, that we're these large integrated vertical companies that are international, 90% of U.S. onshore natural gas production and 85% of oil production comes from small independent producers. All of our crude oil and gas in the Uinta Basin comes from small independent producers. These are small businesses. These are your neighbors. They're your community members. And so we're really proud to be truly integrated members of our communities. Duchesne, Uinta, and Carbon County is growing in importance as well.
Thank you. Is Logan here? Logan, he must have left. Logan, what has, shout out loud, the methane difference in the basin? from, okay, so I'm not sure if you heard that. Logan studies this. They've gone from 7% methane to 3.5% methane during this expansion time in the basin. So when we talk about moving towards clean, that's a big deal. Thanks, Logan. All right, Heather, you get the DC perspective, right?
Okay, yeah.
So tell us a little bit, like DC, the moving parts of bipartisanship or not bipartisanship, and what you think Congress should be working on right now on all of these issues.
Oh, yeah, and I haven't talked about this yet. So, there's been some good bipartisanship. I think now we're seeing some leadership from the White House that's showing more of a some of the above rather than an all the above. And we are seeing Democrats now talking more about all the above. So there's been some changes. I think one of the areas that everyone agrees is more limited government, and that would be like permitting reform. I've been sitting in a lot of the panels today, including the permitting reform panel, talking about reducing the process to get projects moving. I think everyone here on this panel is experiencing that, and there's not to sacrifice necessarily the environment, but to make sure we're using state-of-the-art technology, to make sure we're processing, that we're coordinating. The fact that you were able to get projects licensed and ready to go in 60 to 70 days is incredible and nearly unheard of for any large-scale projects. So I think that's one area, is creating that culture of winning, getting things done and winning. And so permitting reform seems to be particularly right now. We can continue on, but I think another piece when businesses, I'm thinking about the businesses here, are looking for places where there can be more certainty so that we can unleash more capital, we can build, and we can really encourage our those that have capital to unleash to really do so, to create jobs and help America grow. So these are great talking points and easier said than done, but I think there's a lot of ground here, and your leadership has been really critical in that. We'll look forward to working with you moving forward.
How does Washington inspire innovation without creating dependency?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge issue. But there's also like thinking about expanding energy choices too. And we've been talking about taking away energy. You can't use this, you can't use that. What you've been able to build is a bigger tent and dialogue, as reference of all of us that are sitting here on the stage. I think that's been, and I think your Democratic counterparts are looking at that and going, you've got something here. You're getting people to come to the table and talk about how to solve big problems together, not apart. And so there's more compromise rather than conflict. So I think it's a very important piece to be able to do that. Washington isn't particularly great about doing that. And it is often about taking one pot of money and putting it someplace else, whether it's tax credits or incentives. Look, we incentivize good behavior all the time in what we're doing, and there is a role for government to be doing that. There's also a role for government to like streamline processes and then get out of the way and let the market go. And I think a lot of people are seeing that's where we need to be. I say finally that energy has always been in transition, always. There's whale oil before. We burn wood still. I don't use whale oil personally, but the oils are there. But we're going to see wind, solar, geothermal, fusion, whatever's next. It's all additive, and the market really can sort things out.
Thank you. All right. Sadly, I mean, I'd love to keep going. We're getting down to the 30-second windup from all of you. I want you to all imagine you have a room full of the future conservative leaders, senators, congressmen, presidents of the United States. 30 seconds, tell them what you would like to see going forward in energy policy or anything else that you want to tell the future conservative leaders. Ricky, you start, and we'll go down the line.
30 seconds, wow. Okay. I think that we need to embolden domestic energy production, and there's a few ways that we could do that. Permitting reform, judicial reform needs to be a critical part of that as well. I think we need regulatory certainty to avoid those large swings in the pendulum. I would love to see more true cooperative federalism. States know best how to manage their resources. The federal government needs to set a stable and consistent playing field, and then let states have the flexibility to come up with the solutions that make sense in their jurisdictions and allow the free market to do its work. I would also strongly encourage support for exports. The U.S. has the most robust environmental standards in the world. Anything that we do here is going to encourage and embolden a cleaner environment for the rest of the world.
Love it. Good. Jason?
I'll make it quick. I'll just focus on one: durable environmental policy. As I look at the last administration to this administration, it's the whipsaw is challenging. It slows down progress. Building all of these energy projects is like a locomotive going down the tracks. And as you have that type of a whipsaw, it spooks investment, it drives up costs, it delays projects, and fundamentally it's just challenging for the industry.
Yeah, I love it. And I would just add, the more that we do legislatively versus EOs, the more durability that is built into it. So this is really, Congress, we got to get going, right? Because when we don't, the executive does. And when the executive does it, it's the whipsaw.
And to the extent deference to states, as she mentioned with federalism, absolutely.
Love it. Good. Sarah?
I'd say just agree to agree. Strong bipartisan work on legislative solutions to unclog challenges to all of these different projects. We know we need to build stuff. We all know we need to build stuff, and we just need to be working on solutions together.
Love it. Okay, Heather, take us home.
Well, I'll say reduce energy prices, not energy choices, shrink our emissions, not our economy, export American innovation, not American jobs.
And we end on that. Fantastic. Thank you, panelists. Appreciate you being here. Okay, the moment has come for us to say thank you and goodbye. Once again, a shout out to our partners who helped make this happen. Lori, your team, my staff, our volunteers. Thanks to all of you for coming, and really, really appreciate your support, and see you all soon.